my name is Johannes Hechler. I work for the Office for National Statistics. I'm going to start this evening by giving you some sort of demographic background to tell you what we actually know about aging, if indeed there is aging, all right? Because there's one thing that really annoys me and that actually made me go into statistics, but is when I hear people saying, you know, my nan is 60, she's in an awful state, which means that at a societal level, population aging is going to be a disaster. Then there's the next person coming up saying, oh, my granddad is 90, he's doing fabulously, he's in great shape and great health, and he's thoroughly enjoyed the last 25 years of retirement, hence population aging is overall going to be fantastic. Hello. This one, that one? Okay, so, this one's better. Right, so as you can speak, as you really do have to literally stick it on the throat. Okay, so for those who didn't hear me, what I meant to say was, I really hate it when people use anecdotal evidence and things they personally encountered to make grand-sweeping statements about the general population. Because if you take the thought further of taking someone you know and deriving knowledge from that, well, wouldn't it be perfect if you had someone who knows everyone, the entire country, and could derive insights from that? You could call that statistics, and you could, say, have a national office for that, to then produce actual evidence to base debate on. And I hope that tonight we will debate. And I'm going, I'm going to provide some numerical basis for that, because all this data I'm going to show is freely available. You can just go there and check for yourself, rather than being misled by what I usually do, just skim reading the newspapers. Here I've got two nice examples of news clippings. We've got two articles here from pretty much the same time, using the exact same format, even the same picture, to give you two completely opposing interpretations of what population aging might mean. So I've got here one survey saying that population aging will be fine because older workers are sought after, so even if the population gets older, that's fine. The other one saying that it's going to be a disaster because older workers are being put onto the scrap heap. That's what I don't like, because I do the same thing. I just skim read in the morning the newspapers and come away with completely misleading, one-sided interpretations. So here is some evidence. First, it's actually aging. Okay, so far we've just taken that for granted. But what is the evidence? Okay, so I've brought some numbers here with very, very small small font scales, unfortunately. What we see here is one's ages, and we see percentage change. There's percentage change in population numbers at the different ages over the last 14 years. Okay, so here, for instance, we see that people roughly age 30, there is now, well, 40% more of them than 14 years ago. We see very clearly one thing, that that the highest population growth has been in the older ages. Okay, that in turn means that proportionally speaking, the population structure is getting older. Okay, so yes, there is population aging. Is that bad? Well, we don't know. Let's put things into context. Here we actually see the entire population in what we call a population pyramid. Let me just quickly explain what we've got here. Along this axis here, again, we've got the ages. And on here, we've got how many people that exist at each different age. The blue part over here are males, the yellow part over there are females. So for instance, up here, if you look at this conspicuous spike, that's age 69. That means that there are roughly 400,000 males aged 69 and just over 400,000 females. That's how it works. I'm just showing this here to put one thing into perspective. So we have just seen that the oldest population, that the population at the older ages is growing more quickly, and that leads to population aging. But we also see, if we look at the part I marked here with a horizontal line, everything above that is ages 65 and over. and above the second line here, these are ages 90 and over. So these actually don't make up a large part of the population. Okay, so putting this population aging into context isn't quite as clear-cut anymore. So yes, the population is getting older, but that is affecting, so far, a reasonably small part of the population. Now I've overlaid the same chart here with some more bars that you can see sticking out left and right, especially at the top ages, not so much down here. These are these are our best guesses at what the population might look like in the future. Specifically, the population in 2041, what we call projections, and we see that the largest change that we see here, the largest increase in population that we can observe is again at the older ages. So we are still looking, we're expecting population aging to continue, but even in 2041, the population age 65 and over is not the majority. Okay, if that is large enough to be a problem is a different question, and luckily we've got numbers on that to decide that. I had to sadly cut down brutally this presentation because there was far too much to tell. Let me just summarize that the main reason, let me rephrase. One of the reasons that the population is aging is that people tend to live longer than in the past. Okay, the obvious question, of course, for us personally is, in what state of health are we getting older? Because if we're getting older in good health, that may not be a problem, especially not for pensions in the labour market. If we do just add additional years to spend in bad health, that may be a problem. Okay, so I've brought you some data from the last two censuses, okay, for different age groups here. And if we're looking at a proxy for health, we call it, well, disability, specifically disability that is serious enough to limit your day-to-day activities. And we've got this data for different age groups here, starting at age 50, going up to age 85 and over. The blue bars here show the instance of this sort of disability in 2001, and the red bars 10 years later in 2011. Okay, so two things we see here. One is that in both censuses, unsurprisingly, the older you get, the more likely, in percentage terms, the more likely you are to have a disability that affects your day-to-day activity. Isn't that surprising? But the interesting thing here is of course development over time. And here we see an ambiguous picture. We see that let me just explain. We see that the first four age groups up to age 70 here, the blue bar is longer than the red bar. Okay, that means that in 2011 there were just a few people fewer who reported a serious disability than 10 years previously. Okay, so over time, the younger old, up to age 70, grew just a bit healthier, but the opposite is true of the oldest age groups. All the age groups above age 75 really have reported a higher instance of disability in 2011 than 2001. Okay. Health, of course, does have an impact on the labour market. You've seen the results of the slide earlier in the quiz, but here I've got some survey data for the UK of how likely people above state pension age are to still work. So to put that differently, how likely are people to work when they technically could retire and draw a pension? Okay, we've got this data here for roughly 20 years, from 1993 up to 2014. Unfortunately, I didn't find more up-to-date data. So we see, in percentage terms, it simply means out of 100 people who are at state pension age, who could retire, how many of them actually choose to still work? So we see that over the 20 years, this has risen from 8 in 100 to, well, roughly 12 in 100, roughly speaking. Okay. In terms of numbers, we had at the beginning of the period just over 750,000, and this has almost doubled to almost 1.5 million people. Okay, this still only makes for 12 in 100, but this could be of interest for the pension system and for public finance. It seems obvious to make a connection here between health improvements at the younger old ages and this increase in people's willingness to work. But of course, we can't make that the causality, at least not with the numbers we have here. But it seems plausible, at least, to suggest that. Let's go on a little bit. The obvious question here is, why do people keep working? As far as we know, do they work because they want to, because they're in decent enough health to do that, or do they just do it because they really can't afford to retire? Now, luckily, we do have some data on that as well, taken from the labor force survey. We asked people who are still working, even though they could retire technically, what is the reason for continued work? There are many reasons here. There is no particular need to read the different reasons in detail. What will immediately stick out is this nice big bar here, which represents just over half of all people of the respondents who still work beyond state pension age. And this reason here simply says, I'm not ready to stop work. The important thing about this, in my interpretation, and I'd be very interested if you differ on that, is if you're not ready to stop working, that to me implies that you work because you want to. That in turn implies that you're also in the state, in the health to keep working. Again, I can't really imply causality between the health results we saw earlier and this development, but again, it's quite plausible to at least wonder about that. The only group that clearly says I work because I have to pay the bills are these 15% here who says they work to pay for essential items such as bills. So basically they're saying it doesn't really matter whether I'm in good health or not, I have to keep working, but that is a minority. All the other reasons allow us to at least imply that they do it voluntarily, and this group in the middle here in particular. So this was taken from the labor force survey, I should say. Survey is always a bit less reliable than census, but they're fantastic sources of information. So if one of our interviewers from Titchfield calls you to ask you to take part in the labor force survey, please do the survey for us, because we need the data. Okay. Finally, what's happening with pensions? If people are able to work for longer, might be good for pensions and public finance. What exactly is happening? Here we're looking actually at data from the Department for Work and Pensions. So for once, this is not actually ONS data. It's still good, but I don't know as much about it in detail, so it does come with a little health warning. We're looking specifically at what DWP call the caseload, the state pension caseload. They assure me that is pretty much a proxy for how many people are there drawing pension. Okay, so we see the axis down here. This is time, and the axis here is showing you the numbers of pension, or at least of pension cases in the system, in millions. We see that there has been a gradual increase over years from about 9 million to 10 million. Interestingly, this increase has leveled off. And the latest data we had there was from I think mid 2016, so pretty recent. We also see a nice vertical bar here. This represents, very roughly again, the time when the state pension age for women started changing. That was in, I think, April 2010, for all I remember, and it started changing from 60. It's gradually increasing to 65, and then in the future further to equalize with men. So this is when the state pension age came in. So it started changing roughly at the same time that the pensions started leveling off. I can again not imply causality here, but I think there's good evidence that there may be a link. To phrase it very, very carefully. This data, I should say, is only for England for the last 15 years. Okay. So here's some pension data. I would have liked to show more, but that just isn't the time, unless you ask me later. Finally, I want to provide some international comparison. Sylvia, hello. There's a link embedded in here. How can I click on it? You can literally just click on the... Is it opening a browser? Yes, but you can't see it here. Okay, it is opening in the browser. You can't see it here yet, but in case it doesn't work, what we're looking at here was a measure for, let's put it that way, the burden that the pension system has on the working population. Ah, right, okay. Let me just come down here, sit next to Sylvia, to explain what we're looking at. This is Eurostat data. Again, very good, because ONS feeds into it. This allows us some international comparison. What we're looking at here is, the ratio of how many people aged, I think 65 and over, I believe it was, so roughly pension age. How many people 65 and over are there for every 100 people aged 15 to 64? So roughly, how many people at pension age are there for every 100 people of working age, which gives you a proxy, a rough measure of how many workers have to support any one pension. Okay. So let's, if you mouse over the image, you can see what the measure is. Okay, for the United Kingdom in 2016, the value was. Can see that the value was 26.9. So okay, so for every 100 people at working age, there were roughly 28 people at pension age. Is it good or bad? Who knows? But we can show some comparison here. So if we look at Germany, for instance, this value is quite a bit higher at 32. We see that Norway here is a bit below the UK value, and then there's the, let me just go back here, oops. And then we've got the Central European countries where this value is relatively low, so they are relatively speaking younger than the UK. The UK is roughly in the middle of European comparison, and sadly I haven't got the time to show you the same map from 20 years previously because of time reasons, which would have shown that the UK is aging, but it isn't aging quite as fast as the European average. Okay, so the UK is roughly in the middle of the European aging structure, but it isn't aging quite as fast as Germany. Just as an example, for instance, Germany 20 years ago had a value of 22 pensioners for every 100 working age people, and 20 years later it was 32. Okay, so that's a fairly quick rise.
So what's the European average then?
Pardon?
What's the European average?
I don't know. I
You
didn't.
don't know whether the figures are big or high or low.
I haven't looked up the European average. We can actually do that here in a moment, but I think I'll probably wait for the break for that. What we are looking at here is a map of quantiles. Okay, just to go into a bit more detail here. So quantiles mean that the data for all those countries is taken together, and then four groups are created with roughly the same number of countries in them. Currently, the UK is, I think, in group 3 or 4, I think. But at the bottom of that, you can tell that if you look at Norway, which has got a marginally lower value, but is already in groups 2 or 4. I'll look up the European value for the average in a moment. Can we go back to the presentation, Sylvia? You what? Ah, yo. There we go. Right, there we go. Are we coming back? There we are. Okay, so international comparison done. In summary, So we have seen evidence. We've seen evidence that yes, the UK population is aging, and we're expecting it to continue to. If you can't read it, I'll try to speak extra loud. But within Europe, the UK is aging relatively slowly. Okay, you can always argue about what relatively means, but compared to other European countries, it definitely isn't aging at the fastest rate. It is quite, well, we can't really get a clear picture, well, I couldn't get a clear picture, maybe somebody else could, on what exactly is happening to health. There seems to be evidence that for the younger old, health is improving, not necessarily for the older old, but health actually is a brilliant example of where actually we just don't have the evidence to say, and if anyone else claims the opposite, he's probably wrong, because the data I showed you was from the last two censuses. So the last data I showed you was from 2011, not exactly quite up to date. There is, in fact, other data on self-reported health by age, but they changed the question, what exactly is asked in that survey so often recently that you can't really compare things over time. Okay, so a good example of where we can't really say what exactly is going on. And last thing we learned is that the number of people who work beyond state pension age has increased. And if it's still increasing, I don't know, because I haven't looked at the data.